everybody.
Hello, hello, hello. This is the Larry Yates As Is show. We welcome you today, our listeners from around the world. And I have the pleasure of hosting today. This is Reverend Carolyn, and Larry is on the road unexpectedly, but he's actually going to be participating today as a co-host, but he'll be joining us just a little bit later. So I am so happy to have our special guests here today. One of them was here last week that you might remember, Dr. Maisha Hazzard. We were pleased to have her here discussing the Inner City Shakespeare Ensemble, of which she is a part as well as a coach. And she wound up talking to us, and I've known her for years, so she can literally talk about any subject, eyes closed. And we wound up having a brief conversation about politics, and I invited her back, and she said yes. So welcome to Dr. Maisha Hazzard.
Thank you.
A brilliant, brilliant scholar, teacher, minister, business leader, educator, lots of names, lots of degrees. We welcome you here.
Thank you.
And I also want to welcome Reverend Jim Burklo, who's the Assistant Dean of Religious Life at USC. For those not in Southern California, it's the University of Southern California. And we're so happy to have him here with us today. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim. And we're going to reverse the order of business today. We normally start out with a conversation about politics, and then we move into other topics. But today the topic is politics. We wanted to especially have a conversation today, which is only a few days before the California presidential primary. And you know, we are one of the last states to hold a primary, and there's conversations every year about, or at least every 4 years, about why California is last. Because we have so many delegates, so many people being represented, that being involved last in the primary is a question. So we'll have that as our first topic when we come back to that. But there are two things I wanted to share with you today. The first is the month of Ramadan that is upcoming, a celebration, annual celebration and high holy celebration of the Islamic religion. And I'd like to share that. Many people who are not Islamic may not know about it, although there are something like 2.3 billion Muslims in the world. I think a third of the population is Islamic. So we don't understand that so much in our Western society in the United States. And I'd like to share just a little bit about the wonderful celebration of Ramadan. I have personally participated in the celebrations and would like both Dr. Maisha and Reverend Jim to give their input on what Ramadan is and how you see it as a benefit in the world. Can we start with you, Reverend Jim?
Sure. Well, my familiarity with Ramadan comes from working at a university where we have about 1,500 Muslims on our campus, somewhere in that number.
Yes.
And our Office of Religious Life hosts that Muslim student group, so we have Muslims praying in our building 5 times a day, and also celebrating Ramadan or
Yes.
practicing the fast of Ramadan. So it's one of the pillars of Islam, one of the fundamental principles and practices of the faith. And one of our students a few years ago said something I thought was very beautiful. She said, she says the reason we fast is because it's a way of proving that we're human beings. She said that she said the animals, when they're hungry, they eat. When they need to make baby, when they have the urge to reproduce, they reproduce. But humans have the ability to restrain themselves from doing what they want to do. And so she said that's what makes us unique as a species is that ability to show restraint. But we have to practice that ability or else we'll lose it and become like animals. So she said Ramadan, fasting at Ramadan during the daylight hours, which, by the way, is harder when Ramadan falls
In the
in
summertime.
this time of the year because you're doing it for a longer period.
Exactly.
So it's more of a discipline when it falls at this time of the year on their lunar calendar. And she said that's our way of practicing to be fully, truly human.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I did forget to mention all of the amazing credentials, and it's not so much the paper of Dr. Burklo's background, or Reverend Burklo, but it's the way that he's living. He is involved in life at USC as well as being a minister, and we'll have him share a little bit more about his work in ministry, which is one of the amazing reasons that he's here today, because he is not shy when it comes to talking about justice and voting.
Yes.
Dr. Maisha, would you like to share a little bit of your knowledge of Ramadan?
Well, my knowledge of Ramadan is personal in the sense that my big brother and his family became Muslims when I was in my teens. And they made the Hajj a couple of times. And I spent Ramadan with my brother's family. And what I remember most about what my brother said was that Ramadan is a time when, during the hours when you're not eating, you're remembering that it's the Creator who provides everything for you throughout your entire life. And so it's a moment in time when, well, more than a moment. I'm sure it feels like much, much more than that as people are not eating during the daylight hours. But he said it's a time when you really are seriously in prayer, and it's primarily a prayer of thanksgiving and a prayer of surrender to the Creator. It's a moment in time when you're saying, I am so thankful that the Creator provides everything that I need throughout my entire life. It's like taking a few deep conscious breaths. In those moments of consciously breathing, you realize that throughout most of your life, you breathe without a single conscious thought. And it's the same thing with Ramadan. When you stop eating in the regular cycles, you realize, throughout most of my life, I am fed, I am provided for.
Provided for, yes. Thank you. And I'll just add one other tidbit. My former husband was Muslim, and so I celebrated Ramadan and attended mosque with him many times during the year. So in celebrating Ramadan, I really wanted to make sure I understood what it was and asked the imam at the mosque as well as others. And the two things that you haven't mentioned and what you talked about is all so positive, but it's also the two things is that the not eating is a reminder and being in synchronicity with those who do not have in the world. So part of the pillars is charity. And charity begins with them and in reminding people what it may feel like to not eat, not just to take a day from your normal eating, but to also be in communion with those who do not have. And it's also a time of their giving and generosity to charitable ventures. So those are two areas that I know never really talked about when Islam is talked about across any news channel that I know. And I just wanted to bring that up to honor the work that's done, the many Islamic friends that I have, and we give our best to them during this time. So thank you for joining me in that conversation. And then I wanted to jump to another conversation about something that's very contemporary right now and old at the same time. There is a new reproduction of the story of Roots, the docuseries of Roots, based on Alex Haley's book. It was done about 40 years ago, and the people who were leading in characters are still alive, and LeVar Burton, in fact, is a co-executive producer. So he's involved. LeVar Burton, for those who may not know, was the character of Kunta Kinte, who was the original young person captured into slavery from the Gambia, Jufru region of the Gambia. So there's been question and conversation in the Black community as well as others about, was this necessary to have another Roots? The people who created Roots and who produced this new version say yes. And I've heard some other people say, but why bother? We already had a good product. We had a good conversation. Is this a time to bring up slavery? What are your thoughts? I'm going to start with you, Jim.
Well, it's we're a nation that does have trouble remembering the past and remembering the roots not only of our Black population in this country, but just our roots in general. And you just think of all the immigrant people who have come here and purposely forgotten their roots when they came to these shores over the years. So to remember, to go back to those roots, this helps us avoid repeating the past,
Yes.
the parts of the past that we would prefer not to repeat.
Yes.
But if we don't know the past, if we don't know how we got where we are today, then misunderstanding happens, and I think that's part of we've had a rough couple years here with issues around race and diversity in this country, and it's going on now in this political season, and we need to be aware of how things got to be the way they are,
Yes.
and how our issues are not over, not at all, and there's a reason for that, and it has deep history. So
Yes.
whatever helps with that, hooray!
In fact, you are surrounded by young people all the time on the campus of a university, and there is, in fact, it was made for young people.
Yes.
Because the technology that was used before in cinematography is different. It has come a long way. The ability to see it on multimedia and is different. And the characters, they feel are more relatable in today's terms, and they also wound up doing a little bit, you can hear different music in the background. I've stayed up. It's been long. It starts at 9 o'clock and it's over at 11:20 every night. So I've watched it 3 nights in a row, and this is the last night. So I'm bringing it up. For those of you who have not watched it, I encourage you to watch the program on the History Channel. It's also on the Lifetime Channel and others. But they've done an excellent job. It's a little painful for me to watch. Sad. I did forget some of the things. And I am still encouraged also by what I know the story is. And so many, what I was saddened by is not only the treatment of the slaves and those who were left behind, but I was encouraged by the story being told by Kunta Kinte, who's the main character, refusing to give up on who he was, not only his name, but his history. And he remembered his history, where he was from, his parents, and what he was taught, and passed it on. And instilled it, and really instilled it in his daughter, who instilled it in her children, so that they were actually able to tell the story. And what I find fascinating, that was new for me this time watching it, is my family is actually from North Carolina. My father was born in Greenville, North Carolina. My mother was born in Burklo near Wilmington, North Carolina, which wasn't far from, Durham and Raleigh is kind of in the middle of all of that. And when they talked about the story and the uprising and them going to freedom in Durham, I had a whole new insight into my family, because my mother did not want to talk about slavery. She said her family didn't talk about it. She felt all of her family was free. And I, in my infinite research, went on one of the websites, Ancestry.com, and actually found the slave owner of my great-great-great-grandfather. But all she knew was freedom, and she wanted to live from that place. Dr. Maisha, do you have any thoughts on Roots?
Oh, I have many thoughts on
Yes.
Roots. When Roots came out in 1977, I believe it was,
Yes.
I actually was in West Africa, and I arrived back in the U.S. the night that the first episode
Oh, really?
aired.
Wow.
Wonderful. Yes.
And I remember I went first to my uncle's house in Wilmington, Delaware, and he and all of his friends were watching Roots on television at his clubhouse. And when I walked in, my uncle was telling everyone, "Here's my niece. She has just come from Roots."
Yes.
And so I sat there with a group of men who at that time were in their 50s as they were watching it. And it was the first time in that particular group that they had actually really talked about slavery.
Yes.
And you could see how moved they were. In understanding the need for a new airing of Roots, I realized that so many people do not understand that the roots of institutionalized racism were actually set in slavery. It's virtually impossible to really understand what we're looking at in terms of racism now, what we're looking at in terms of the number of African-American men who are incarcerated. When we look at the destruction of
Yes.
the African-American family, because that's what this incarceration in this new era of slavery has actually done, because that's, in a sense, what is actually taking place in the penal system that we are dealing with right now. I understand why it was needed, because when you look at the 1970s version, there is a very different rhythm to the editing. There's
Yes.
the whole cinematography, as you already mentioned, is very different. So to make it so that you can engage a new generation of young people in the drama, in the human story.
In the human story, yes. And it's
So important.
It's three generations.
Right, it's
And
that's true.
If you will hold your, oh, okay. Thought we had someone online.
All right.
So you please continue, and then we'll move into our politics.
Okay.
But you actually talked about a little bit, because that's part of what I was going to bring up in our discussion of politics, the issues that we're not talking about.
Right.
But if you have a couple of other thoughts.
It is very difficult to look at what's going on in terms of race relations without understanding the roots of slavery, without
Yes.
understanding that the position of African Americans in the consciousness of the world,
Yes.
not just in the United States, was established during slavery as a way of justifying
Yes.
the enslavement of the peoples of Africa. It is the story not only of this nation, but the story of the world.
Of the world, yes.
Because if you look at what's going on in Europe, as many of the people from the colonies have now started moving to the European countries that once colonized them, that were the players in the slave trade, you can see really some things that are the result of that whole period in history.
Yes.
That began with the slave trade. When you look at Africa,
And I
the
think
continent.
we do have a caller. Are they on now?
I'll finish this thought
You'll
quickly.
finish it, yes.
When we look at the continent of Africa and people want to understand the underdevelopment of the continent, you have to take into consideration if you have 50 million people or more removed from a continent, then that disturbs the development of civil society and city nations and political stability and economic stability. I'll stop there.
They disappeared.
They disappeared again.
It may be a connection issue.
A segue, though.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
It is a segue.
The segue into politics is to think about the racial significance of voter suppression that's
Yes.
going on in this country. And, we take
And voter ID.
the voter ID, which is about voter suppression. So there's, an active effort to disenfranchise black voters in this country and other minorities and low-income people. And it's a very blatant, very cynical campaign around the country. And there's there's history behind this. And I think anything that shines light on that history is going to help people understand this current debacle that we're facing. And I don't think the country is awakened yet to just how serious this voter suppression's effects are going to have on the November election in particular. This could really be an ugly situation. Very shocking, I think, to the country to see what's happened and just slowly, stealthily, what has occurred.
Yes.
With this.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts on roots as well as Ramadan. And we're going to move now into this conversation about presidential candidates. And I was hoping to be co-host so I could be a little more fiery and involved and jump in the way I want to jump in. However, at the moment, I'm going to participate as host, and we'll throw a few comments in. But I'd like to start with a discussion from the standpoint of, given let's first talk about the California primary and what's at stake here, which is the Democratic position, providing either Hillary with the push over the top or Bernie with a push to a platform. So I'd like to have that conversation. And also, because all three major candidates have been in the California, Southern and Northern California regions over the last 10 days or so, I'd like to bring up that kind of conversation. And I think we do have a caller on the line. Thank you, caller. Are you still there? All right. Someone is in and out. So I may make up a question, or you can make up one. But let's start with that conversation about the current candidates and the California primary, how important it is for us to participate, number one, and what's at stake. So, Dr. Maisha, would you like to start on that?
Well, first of all, when you talk about the need for participation,
Yes.
my first word to everyone is that we have a responsibility to participate.
Yes.
There are a number of people who say it doesn't matter, and there are lots of conspiracy theories that talk about, how you have to be in the bloodline to win the presidency, and many different elements to that. And while there may be some truth to some of it, I've looked at a lot of those things in my research as well. Still, there are differences that can be made by the participation, and we don't know how much we really can change the world until we get more and more people who are participating
Yes.
in the process.
Yes.
People fought and died for it. When we realized
Absolutely.
that we were considered three-fifths human in the original plan
Hold
for,
on a
for
second.
voting.
Caller, can you join us?
Please take the caller.
Is there a call on the line? Can you speak up? Okay, must be connection problems.
Yes.
Okay, we'll continue.
Yes, we all love technology.
Yes.
When it works.
When it works, yes.
It's a wonderful gift. But going back to the fact that at the beginning of this nation, African Americans were considered 3/5 human, so that they could count.
Well, you pull them in.
They could count those who were enslaved as aggregate votes for the slave owners.
Yes.
So it really was still about controlling this
Yeah.
mechanism called the nation.
Hello, we hear
Hello,
you.
this is Larry.
And here we are.
I'm glad you are calling in. Who's on the line?
I'm so sorry. I've been trying to call, and there was just a big mix-up.
There's some feedback in the background.
Okay, let me do this.
So if you'll turn the volume down a little bit, I think that'll help.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, sounds much better. So caller, I believe that this is the
Can you-
infamous Larry Yates on the line.
Okay, now I can hear you guys. I'm so sorry about that. We had some technical problems trying to get on, and I'm so don't. I called in and interrupt Dr. Maisha. Please finish your
Oh.
your thoughts on what the question was.
Hello, Larry. I'm so glad that you finally connected that I'm
Yes.
going to say, please speak
Yes.
while we have you.
No, first of all, I just want to thank you guys for coming, and Carolyn, thank you. You're doing a wonderful job, and I think that started out with honoring Islam, and just honoring other people's religion and their culture and their environment, because we're all kind of shaped by our culture, our religion, and our environment. And so often especially we here in America, we tend to just only try and understand what's going on in Christianity, but there's a big world out there, and I think this is an opportunity right now with this election coming up for all of us to take a good look at ourselves and see where do we want to go from here. We look at one person on the other side, calling his name Donald Trump, that is spewing all of this poison out on the Hispanics and the Muslims and anybody else that gets in his way. And I think that's a sad. This is sad to see a presidential election come to this point. But I think I would love to hear the answer to the question that Carolyn just asked you guys about what is at stake here with this California election.
Okay, so
So yes, please, thank you for calling in, and you can stay on the line while we continue.
I was looking forward to hearing what you were going to say.
Go ahead, please.
Well, what do you think is at stake, Larry? Why don't you give us your input first? I know you mentioned Trump and spewing venomous commentary about different groups and populations and people. Because it's people, it's not just statistics and data. So what else would you like to share? Yes.
Well, I think I want to start with this, and I try, Carolyn, every week now during this election, I tell everybody, go out and vote on the county level, on the town level, on the city level, and on the state level, and on the presidential level. We have to get out and vote for all of these guys. Even if there's a butterfly catcher that's coming up for election in your community, go out and vote and see who's going to be the best butterfly catcher. Because we need, what's at stake here is not just the presidency. It's the Senate, it's the House, it's local government, state government, and to me, personally, I think the danger here is letting this foul energy take more control of this country, and we'll all suffer. And I think with Hillary and Bernie, I love what Bernie has done. I love the fire that he has built under these young people, because we need them to get involved. But at the same time, this is so dangerous now from the other side that I don't want to see him continue to tear Hillary down because she's going to be the front runner. But we don't need an injured horse in the race. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit of my thought.
Thank you. I like that thought of an injured horse.
Right. Yes.
We don't want her run over. Absolutely.
We can't afford it.
We can't afford it. No.
We can't.
And so, Reverend Jim, please share. I mentioned before that, why don't you tell the audience about your background and what you told me last week about touching the palm of each person you meet.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have a very serious problem of low voter turnout.
Yes.
In California as a whole, and it's particularly bad in Southern California. Mm-hmm. And we're into the 20s. You know, the 20-something percent mm-hmm. turnout in Southern California for local races. It's more for national. You know, I'm sure we'll have a bigger turnout than that for the national election. Mm-hmm. But we have really a serious problem with this, and it's something that is going to require non-traditional approaches, I think.
Yes.
It's not just a matter of telling people that they should do this. I had talked with some young folks at USC. I put together an event a year and a half ago. It was called Reverent Voting, and it's about the idea that was come up with by a professor of philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin, a guy named Paul Woodruff, and he says voting is irrational. Mm-hmm. You don't vote because you think your particular vote is going to have any real impact on the outcome of the election. You vote because it's a ritual. It's a ceremony that you enact to express your value, your belief in the idea that your opinion counts as much as the big shots, the big bucks of the country. So it's about a belief system. I saw a video a couple years ago that really had a powerful effect on me thinking about this problem and getting myself more involved in it. It's a video of what happened in Florida when they had voter suppression there in 2012.
Yes.
The Republicans very actively tried to suppress the black vote down there. And guess what? The black people of Florida woke up and they said, this is not okay. You know, we're not gonna play it that way. And so they showed up.
Yes.
And so then you have this video of this long, huge line, almost all black people in this line waiting to get into this voting booth, voting polling station, because there's so few polling stations that were available purposely to reduce the turnout. And they are singing and they are dancing and they are having a party out there because they're doing a ritual.
Yes.
And they are and so it had the reverse effect. The effort for voter suppression in Florida, it had a reverse effect, but it gets back at the nature of why we vote at all.
Yes.
And to demonstrate.
Larry, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think Jim is absolutely correct. Now, Jim, thank you so much for being on the show, because one of the things that I have seen is that you take Ferguson and you take Ohio, where when young people know that their vote has power in their community, when they can feel the power in their community, then that drives them to understand more and more the importance of getting out voting from local, county, state, town, and national. But when you look at Ohio, the prosecutor, the district attorney, that wouldn't bring the policeman up for killing that young boy. I forget his name, God bless my soul. I forget the young child's name. But when they let that policeman off, well, this district attorney came up for election, and they voted him out.
Yes.
And you see the same thing in Ferguson. So what we are now, we see an opportunity that there's a wave of young people seeing that their vote does have impact, that they can benefit from their vote, and they lose when they don't vote. I think we have an opportunity to just continue to educate them and push this forward.
One of the problems we have, Larry, though, in California is a pretty different situation, particularly here in L.A., where you have a gargantuan media market. And so you have the L.A. Times going out to millions of people, well, fewer than
Fewer now.
in the
Fewer
past.
now,
but,
yes.
but, the media markets cover, the broadcast and print media markets are gigantic, and so there's no cover. For instance, there really is a very interesting race going on in my district, my assembly district, and the two it's a lively, interesting race between two Democrats, but it's still a pretty lively thing. But there's hardly any coverage
No
of
coverage
this.
at all.
And that's true of all the districts and the smaller municipalities in LA County. We have 88 cities in this county. Hardly any coverage until some politician is corrupt and does something spectacular. Then it's in the paper. So that's what happened in the city of Bell. And then they, finally voted these guys out. But there's no proactive, hardly any media coverage of local affairs, and that really makes it tough for voters to get engaged.
This is also including the Senate race.
Yes.
There are
That's
actually
absolutely right.
18 candidates for the Senate race.
That's right.
Now, I know about a few because they've had the money to be on TV with ads with Kamala Harris as well as Loretta Sanchez. But there are 16 other candidates who are on the ballot, and it's a little nerve-wracking because if you go to your polling place and pull these names up, because people are not educated about who they are, I have my preferences, but I know that most people don't know who these people are. Dr. Maisha, you have something to add?
Yes, I was going to say we live in a time now with social media where we can change this dynamic very easily right now, especially with the younger generation. We see that happening at the presidential level.
Yes.
In the primaries. You can see the level of communication going out on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and we can go on in terms of that. So that can be changed.
Yes.
But many people have said that all politics are local.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't understand that. But we can look at the gerrymandering that has taken place, where the districting has changed.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Which has allowed for voter suppression and a number of other things that have happened at the state level, county and state level, across this nation. And if we go back and we look at what happened as President Obama took office, we can see that the movement amongst the Tea Party people really happened at local levels.
Yes.
Taking over the city, county, and state offices so that they could then have voter suppression because the fear that if this black man could make it into the White House, then there was the fear that then African Americans would think that we could do anything and would not be under control in the same ways anymore. And so you can see what has happened during these 7.5 years of his administration.
Yes.
When racism has peaked. I hope it has peaked.
Well,
and it's going down.
Yes, Larry.
This is so great, Dr. Maisha. Thank you so much, because this has been part of my pet peeves out here. Because I listen to us for the most part, not you guys, but we say, well, the young people don't know, they're not involved, or there's not enough marketing and media out there. Now, what you're saying has some truth to it, but we have to remember one thing. The Republicans are kicking our butts out here on these local and state and these neighborhood communities. So they're getting the message. That's where their power is. That's where their power base is. We just have to somehow we have to encourage our young people to get more involved. Because the thing about it, in these local races, they've never had lots of money in these little local races. But whenever you see a little sign on one's front yard, that's the biggest advertisement that some of the local guys will even get. But the Republicans are really, really good about getting their vote out on these local levels. So I don't know whether it's about the marketing or advertisement necessarily. I know they play a part. But
it plays a part.
Why can't we do it?
Well, we can. There's no reason it doesn't have a Democratic name or Republican name on it. But I think it's, what Dr. Maisha said, which I think is magnificent, is it's possible. The technology's here, and it's not expensive. That's the great thing about this using social media is you only have to pay for somebody, maybe, because young people do this stuff so easily. They will do it for free and intern in some places. And you do have to maybe pay somebody to coordinate the message, because it's the messaging that needs to be managed and clarified. And what I would say that the Republicans do better than the Democrats is messaging.
Well, they also do values.
Yes,
Right.
value-based. Yes.
And they use churches.
Yes.
They use churches and
Right.
associations
Yes.
and clubs, and so it's a one-on-one. It's a person-to-person
Yes.
kind of communication that goes on. It's not so much media. Whereas within the Democratic Party, there's such a diffusion and such diversity within the Democratic Party that it makes it more complex, more complicated to reach all the different people. But when you're dealing with values voting, you begin to pull together, sort of congregate,
Well,
use that term, people who are in communities already with particular kinds of values, and it's easier to get the information out.
Larry, did you have something to add?
Yeah. Oh man, this time is going by so fast.
It is,
I
yes.
think one of the things, and I'm going to say this, and no one has to agree with this, because I think one of the things, from my perspective, what we miss and what the liberal minded and the Democrat miss is that the Republicans they tell their constituents or their people what they want to hear. That means they can lie as long as they're telling their people what they want to hear. Where Democrats and liberal people that's running tell their people what they need to hear, and what they need to hear is not as palatable sometimes as what they want to hear. And I think that makes a huge difference in the turnout.
Well, when you're dealing with values voting, you automatically go towards the emotional elements and the trigger points in people's belief systems to get people to participate. Whereas within the Democratic Party and those who are most likely to vote Democratic, you're talking about such diversity of ideas.
But I'm going to just disagree slightly.
Okay.
Because the Obama campaign was very effective in reaching young people, in reaching churches, and they found every way to get there and got great turnout and support during his campaign in 2008.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. That's
Yes.
at the presidential level. And
Right.
you're seeing the same thing.
Oh, you're saying
with-
on
at
these
local-
other levels,
at local
yes,
level.
local
And
levels,
I-
yes.
Which is where the control has been
I'm with
taken over.
Dr.
Yes.
Maisha. I'm with that.
Totally
that was my
agree
point
with
as
that,
well,
yes.
Carol, that
Yeah.
local level.
Yeah.
And I just had a book published called Deeper Love, Faithful Rhetoric for Progressive Social Change, and it's all about this very problem of in this case, religious values
Yes.
being projected in politics, and how liberals have tended to shy away from the use of religious language in the last 30 or 40 years because they're afraid they're going to sound like fundamentalists. But we used to have this thing in this country called the civil religion, which had a kind of non-doctrinal, broad Judeo-Christian concept of the good society. You know, a faith and spiritually based rhetoric about this. So it's time to revive that civil religion in politics for progressive social change, and we can do it, and we can do it in a way that's inclusive and respectful of our diversity spiritually. It can be done. And so
Yes.
one thing that about voting that I've come up with a couple things I'm trying out. Okay, one of them is called Votivator, VOTIVATOR, and the idea is that everybody that some of us are nerds. Okay, I'm a voting nerd. Not everybody is a nerd like I am. Okay, I keep track of this stuff, all the trivia. So then what I do is I make an event page at Facebook, and the event is the election. It's Jim Burklo's Votivator page for the election. The date of the event is the date of the election. The location of the event is the polling place where I would go. And then I write out, then I describe the event, which is how I'm going to vote, and then send it to everybody I know, including politicians, so that they will know that I am influencing others. And then I encourage others, my other friends, to make their own Votivator
event page,
and use social media so that those of us who are nerds can help out those of us who are not. It is a perfectly legitimate way to participate in democracy, to copy somebody else's voting list. It's totally legit.
We actually received that in the mail if you have declared yourself as either whichever party, and they send you a digest of how you are expected to vote or how they're proposing you vote.
Yeah, but this is person to person. This is individuals.
I understand that. No, I'm just saying that you get that.
The tabloids.
I want to, we have only a few minutes left for the program.
Yeah.
So I'd like to concentrate these last couple of minutes on the presidential primary. My key concern is that people aren't going to vote who feel like they don't need to participate. The second level concern is those who do vote and who they give their vote to, that will splinter the democratic space that we're working in. And my third concern is the potential of a Trump positioning in this country in a way that will move him through to being closer to being president. Now, what my hope is that there are more stories like Trump Steaks and Trump University and Trump Barbecue and whatever he has brought forth from a business standpoint, which may have a different impact, because people really have not seen his impact. I went through some of the websites that show a comparison of the presidential candidates. And I looked at what their policies were, their positions were on about 20 different areas as far as a matrix. I'm kind of a nerd, too, in that way. And when I put them down with Bernie and Hillary, you can at least see a comparison. They actually agree on a lot of different things. They just disagree perhaps on the implementation. And Bernie doesn't always have a solid, to me, isn't presenting necessarily a solid implementation plan. But where I see a huge difference is with Trump. There is no opinion on most of these 18 areas, not about character, but about policy. He has no position. That is scary to me, that he can get this far without having a position on things like crime, on energy, stimulus. I can just keep going on what he has no position on. So I'd like you all to have a final word with your thoughts on, we have 5 minutes? Good. So it doesn't have to be a final word. So if you'll share your thoughts on what you think your biggest concern is and what we might do, a positive note to the listeners on how they can be proactive. Thank you, Jim, for what you just said about how they can be a votinator. Was it votinator?
Votivator.
Votivator. I like that word. Yes.
Donald Trump is dangerous because you have no idea what he's going to say from one moment to another.
Yep.
His opinions, his policies will change in a single day, maybe even in a single hour, because he is an individual who knows how to practice mind control and crowd control. He's manipulating people, very much, I think, in the same realm as Hitler and Himmler in the Nazi regime. There is a rumor going around, and I think it can be substantiated, that he has kept a book of Hitler's speeches on the nightstand in his bedroom, which means that he's been studying how to manipulate crowds, how to get people, how to hit people's trigger points.
Yes.
So what I would like to put Trump to the side for the moment, because I think our first very important moment is to deal with what's happening in the Democratic primary.
Yes, absolutely.
And why at this particular moment Bernie Sanders' position is potentially making things difficult for Hillary Clinton. And I think we have to deal with some gender issues. If we had more time, we could get into those.
Yes.
What people are hearing, what people are thinking about her, often have nothing to do with her experience, her professional expertise, but about some stereotypic things about women.
Yes.
And we haven't gotten an opportunity to really talk about that.
We haven't been clear, and in having the conversation about Bernie and to his face about how he's positioning her. So I know that will come up, and so I
Yes.
appreciate you bringing that up.
He knows what he's doing.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm a lot
so
more-
do
yeah.
you have a final thought for today and what we're
Final
talking
thought, vote for the individual who has the experience internationally and nationally to work with the complexity of this country as the leader, as the person in the White House.
Yes. Thank you. Jim.
My hope is that, number one, we will recognize that Trump wins by being outrageous, and if we portray him as being outrageous, we're helping him win. So it's ironic, that if we say he's a loose cannon and that he doesn't make any sense and that he has no position, that's actually his strength. So we
Yes.
have to recognize that we have to understand this person to be what he is, and recognize that we're going to have to very vigorously present to the American people a positive campaign for a positive person with a positive vision of where the country should go.
Thank you
and
so
I think
much.
it's going to happen.
Yes.
It's not whether it's Bernie or Hillary.
I
the
gotta get
Democrats are
Larry
going to
in.
get behind them.
Larry, quickly, in 20 seconds, can you give us some final thought?
Okay, real quick, and so much. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. But I think we should really take a look at a lot of what we are saying against Hillary is attack on the power, on women coming into power. You look across this country, you can look at the local races right here in the state of California. You see women coming into power. A lot of the problem with Hillary is that people is afraid or not ready for a woman to come into power and be the leader of the free world, just like they was afraid of an African American.
And I'm going to cut
Yes.
you off. Thank you for a very powerful message. My closing thought is, as Larry says every week, a nation can rise no higher than it elevates its women. Use your vote to elevate the women in the country.
Amen.
And in the world,
Amen.
because we make a difference everywhere we are. Peace out. Please vote. Please vote. Take the time. Take your children. Make this a family event and make it a conscious vote.
A matter of faith.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Let's do this again.
Now let me welcome everybody.